What he tossed the car keys in the air and smirked. "You can walk home, Evelyn. It's a nice day for a stroll,"
That's what my son-in-law, Darren,
said to me outside the church. The very church where my only daughter had just gotten married. The same church where I paid for the stained glass windows in full 2 decades ago. The air was thick with July heat. My dress stuck to my back, and my heels sank slightly into the gravel. The parking lot shimmered. I looked around. No one moved. Not my daughter, not my niece, not even the pastor. They all looked elsewhere. Not one soul offered me a ride. I gripped the handle of my purse. My heart didn't race. It just ached. Like a rope stretched too long, pulled too tight. But I smiled, a short one. Dry? Inside my head, I heard my late husband's voices. "Never make a scene when you hold the cards." So I turned and I walked. My shoes clicked against the hot pavement as I passed the marquee. "Today, Megan and Darren. July 20th, 2024. The letters looked like they were melting under the sun, like the moment itself would drip away and vanish. But I wouldn't forget, oh no. My daughter didn't look back. Megan used to beg for bedtime stories. Now, she handed me a paper corsage and said, "Keep it short," when I tried to give a toast. Apparently, Darren's mother had already spoken. Apparently, they didn't want it to run long. Apparently, I had become an extra. My hands were swelling. My vision was sharp, too sharp. Everything around me felt loud. Cars humming on the highway beyond the trees, a baby crying in someone's arms, the organ still playing faintly inside. They think I have nowhere else to go. I kept walking 1 block, 2, past the post office. The old library. My feet blistered, but I didn't stop. I didn't cry. When I reached the edge of Hilland Road, I paused beneath the creaky "Welcome to Ash Creek" sign. The church steeple was still visible behind me, small and white and proud. Funny thing about that land, no one knew I owned it. Bought it in 1989, quietly, in my maiden name. Charles, my late husband, left it in a trust for me. When they wanted to build a bigger church, I leased the land cheap. Because I believed in community. Because I thought maybe kindness would come back someday. It didn't. But silence. Silence has its own weight, its own teeth. They think today was a humiliation. They haven't seen what quiet justice looks like yet. Because the lease expires next spring. And I don't plan on renewing it. So when the bells ring next year and there's no church standing on that land, they'll remember the walk they made me take. Every step of it. Especially Megan. Especially Darren. Tell me, if your daughter's husband left you in a church parking lot, would you forgive him? Or would you wait and let the earth answer for you? Charles used to leave the porch light on for me. Even when I worked late at the library, even when I told him not to wait up, he did. I'd come home to the scent of old coffee and the soft rustle of newspaper. He'd be there in his chair, pretending not to doze off. "Hey, sweetheart," he'd say, rubbing his eyes. Quiet night, mostly. I'd smile, kicking off my shoes and stretching my sore feet. That was the rhythm of our life. Small, gentle, ours. Megan was born in a thunderstorm. Charles drove like a madman, one hand on the wheel, one on mine. The nurse said I cursed so loud they heard me 2 floors down. I didn't care. When they placed her in my arms, pink and furious, I cried like I hadn't in years. She had Charles' eyes. He used to call her June Bug. On her 3rd birthday, we couldn't afford much. I baked a vanilla cake from scratch and glued paper flowers to the kitchen wall. Charles brought home a second-hand red tricycle. She rode it up and down the driveway until dusk, giggling so hard she hiccuped. "Do you think she'll remember this?" I asked him that night. "She will if we remind her often enough." But life doesn't remind us. It rushes past. When Megan started 1st grade, I held her hand all the way to the classroom. She wore a blue dress with tiny white apples. I ironed it twice that morning, just in case. She clung to my skirt when we got to the door.
Will you wait outside?
She asked. "All day if I have to," I told her. I did. 6 hours on a wooden bench reading dog-eared copies of Reader's Digest. No one asked me to. I just didn't want her to feel alone. But we were steady. I packed lunches. I clipped coupons. I saved every tax return, every bonus, every Christmas tip from the neighborhood kids. When Charles passed, I didn't cry at the funeral. I waited until everyone left, then folded his jacket and slept with it for a month. Megan never knew I wore the same shoes to every job interview after he died. Never knew I skipped meals to pay her tuition deposit. She just smiled in that wedding dress and turned away. Megan changed after she met Darren. At first, I thought it was just the thrill of love. She was 23, full of spark, and he had a strong jaw and a firm handshake. He sold insurance, talked a lot about leverage and investments, even tried to explain Roth IRAs over Sunday dinner. Charles would have seen through him in a heartbeat. But I wanted Megan to feel loved, safe. So I smiled through it all, even when Darren corrected her in front of me or made little jokes about my budget casseroles. I laughed, then washed the dishes slower than usual. When they moved in together, she stopped calling every day, then every week. When they got engaged, she didn't ask for my help with the planning, said Darren's mother had a knack for events and wanted to handle it all. I offered to pay for flowers. Megan said the florist was already chosen. I offered to host the rehearsal dinner at my home. Oh, Darren thinks it's a bit small, she replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, not quite meeting my eyes. His parents know a place in Lexington, I nodded. Then I drove home that night and scrubbed the oven until my knuckles bled, when I gave her the embroidered handkerchief that belonged to my mother. Her grandmother. She smiled politely, thanked me, then left it on the kitchen counter. I found it the next day next to an empty coffee mug. She didn't even notice. I used to think being a mother meant being present. Now I wasn't even invited. Darren sent out the wedding invitations through a company called WedRight. Mine arrived 2 days late, and my name was misspelled. No middle name. No Mrs., just Evelyn H. Blee, no seat reserved. Just general seating. It was small, but I felt it, like I was a guest in a story I wrote. The week before the wedding, I dropped off a box of Megan's childhood things, drawings, report cards, her favorite stuffed elephant. I thought she might want a memory tucked into the day. She never opened it. I found the box in her garage a month later, half soaked by a leaking pipe. Mold curling the edges of crayon drawings. Her second-grade poem, Why I Love My Mom, barely legible. That's when I knew I hadn't lost my daughter to time. I'd been erased. Deliberately. The house smelled like garlic bread and tension. I had arrived 20 minutes early with a casserole dish wrapped in foil, my best blue cardigan, and a hopeful heart. Megan had said it was a family gathering. Casual, just a few close people before the wedding weekend. She'd asked me to bring something homemade, so I did. The front door was open. Music played faintly from a speaker in the living room. Something upbeat and modern I couldn't name. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. I stepped inside, holding the warm dish with both hands, careful not to let the foil tear. Megan was at the sink, her back turned. Darren leaned against the counter sipping a beer. His mother stood nearby, slicing strawberries. Nobody noticed me at first. Hey everyone, I said gently. Megan turned, smiled too quickly. Mom, great, thanks for coming. I offered the casserole. Darren didn't move to help. I set it down myself, nudging aside a store-bought tray of meatballs. The dish clinked softly on the granite. I glanced around for oven mitts, thinking I might warm it up before serving. Where should I put this? I asked, opening the oven slightly. Darren's voice cut the air like cold steel. You don't need to pretend you belong here, Evelyn. The words came out flat, not angry, not joking. Just final. Time didn't stop. But my breath did. I closed the oven slowly, hand trembling just enough for the mitt to slip. Megan didn't say anything. Darren's mother turned away, wiping her hands. The room suddenly felt too bright, like every bulb had been dialed up. I smiled. Reflex more than feeling? Oh, I said. I was just trying to help. You've done enough, Darren muttered. Heading toward the fridge, I stood there. For 3 full seconds. The air conditioning vent above me hummed loudly. It blew against the back of my neck, sharp and dry. My cardigan clung to my arms. A glass clinked from the hallway. Someone laughed again, someone who hadn't heard. I stepped back, picked up my purse. My heels tapped softly on the tile as I moved toward the patio door. Outside, the sun had begun to set. The backyard overlooked a row of oaks, silhouettes against a fading orange sky. A wind chime tinkled. I placed both hands on the railing, knuckles white, not from anger, from staying still, from not walking back inside and breaking that tray of meatballs across his smug little smile. But I didn't. I just stared at the trees and stayed quiet. I didn't say goodbye. No one stopped me as I slipped back inside, grabbed my keys from the side table, and walked out the front door. I left the casserole behind. Still warm, still untouched. The driveway was full. I had to park down the block earlier next to a fire hydrant and a tipped-over trash can. It took me 3 minutes to reach my car. 3 minutes that felt like 30. When I sat in the driver's seat, I didn't start the engine. I just stared at my hands on the steering wheel, the veins on the back of them. The chipped polish. I'd painted them the night before. Light rose. Megan used to love that color. "You're trying too hard," Darren had said once. After our first dinner together, I'd worn the same shade. That dinner, I remember the chicken was dry. I'd been nervous, wanting to impress him. Megan had brought him over with no warning. I had 10 minutes to throw something together. He looked around the house like it was a clearance rack. His eyes scanned the curtains, the carpet, the knickknacks on my shelves, my memories, my life, and dismissed it all with one raised eyebrow. After they left that night, I found my wedding photo moved slightly on the mantel. Just enough to make me feel crazy. Now, years later, I sat outside his house, hearing his words echo like static. "You don't need to pretend you belong here," said. Did Megan hear it? Did she agree? When she was 7, she used to write me notes in crayon. "Mommy, you're the bestest girl." I kept them in a shoebox under my bed. Now I couldn't even tell if she saw me. I started the car. The headlights came on. The glow lit up the house, the front window, the silhouettes inside. Moving, mingling, unaware, unconcerned. As I pulled away, my tires crunched gravel. I glanced once in the rearview mirror. Not a single head turned, not even hers. That night, I sat at the edge of my bed and kicked off my shoes. My feet ached. My heart floated. Not broken, not heavy, just suspended, untethered. Like I was watching my own life from outside the window. Like they'd locked the door and lost the key. Tell me, if your daughter stood by while her husband said you didn't belong, would you still fight for a seat at their table? Or would you build your own? Evelyn turned the envelope over 3 times before opening it. No return address, just her name in block letters. Postmarked 2 days ago from Lexington. She sat at the kitchen table, a chipped blue surface that had seen decades of school forms, grocery lists, and lukewarm coffee. The morning sun poured in through the lace curtain. It should have felt peaceful, but the paper inside was thick, formal, legal. She unfolded it slowly. Each crease crackled like dry leaves. Notice of default, it read. Her breath caught. She read it again. According to the document, a home equity line of credit had been opened under her name, against a property in her name. A property she didn't remember authorizing. The numbers made her chest tighten. The $86,000 withdrawn over the past 14 months. Her signature appeared at the bottom of the agreement, barely legible. Crooked. She didn't remember signing anything like this. She pulled open the drawer beside the fridge. Her catch-all. Receipts, takeout menace, old warranties. She searched until she found the pink folder Megan had asked her to sign months ago. "It's just a title update," Megan had said, chewing gum while Evelyn held her reading glasses. "I'm not great with all the banking lingo," Megan added sweetly, but Darren said it's just to clean up records. Totally normal, plus Evelyn had signed it. Back then. She was just grateful they'd dropped by. Now her stomach twisted. She picked up the phone, called the number listed at the bottom of the default notice. A woman with a soft voice confirmed everything. Yes, the loan was active. Yes, payments had been missed. Yes, foreclosure proceedings would begin within 60 days if the balance wasn't paid. Evelyn stared out the window as the woman continued. Her eyes settled on the bird feeder Charles had built. A squirrel hung upside down from the edge, nibbling seed it hadn't earned, its tiny claws digging into the wood. Evelyn's lips pressed tight. She hung up. Then she sat still for 20 minutes, hearing the tick of the kitchen clock grow louder with every second. They hadn't just humiliated her. They were feeding off her, living in a house she owned, spending credit in her name, telling her to walk home, while building their lives on ground she built. She stood up, opened her desk drawer, and pulled out a folder she hadn't touched since Charles passed. Inside the original deed, her trust documents, her signature, her real one. She wasn't helpless. She was awake now. The woman at the bank wore glasses too large for her face. She flipped through the paperwork with a polite smile, scanning each page with a highlighter. Evelyn sat across from her, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Is there something specific you're looking to verify, Miss Harper?" the woman asked. Evelyn nodded slowly. "I just want to see the documents tied to this loan. The ones I supposedly signed." The woman hesitated, then swiveled her monitor. "Of course. We keep digital scans of everything." A few clicks later, there it was. Evelyn leaned forward. Her name, spelled right, but the signature, it was hers and it wasn't. The loop on the was too tight. The tail on the E ended flat instead of curling down. It looked traced. Careful. Mechanical. She'd written her name thousands of times. On field trip forms, on bills. On sympathy cards after Charles died. She knew her own hand. This one was someone else's. The woman noticed her silence. "Do you believe this isn't your signature?" Evelyn straightened her spine. I believe someone thought I wouldn't check. The banker blinked. I see. Well, if you'd like, we can escalate this as a fraud case? No. Her voice was calm, even. Not yet. She stood, smoothed the front of her blouse, and picked up her purse. Thank you for your help.
That's all I needed?
Outside, the wind had picked up. Leaves swirled along the sidewalk like something was shifting. Just slightly. The kind of breeze that hinted fall was coming. Evelyn walked to her car without looking back. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She drove straight to the post office, asked for a new P.O. box paid in cash. Then she went home. She pulled out a legal pad, the one she used to keep grocery lists on, and at the top, in bold ink, she wrote, "As quiet plan, do not rush a below that 1. Call Charles's old attorney 2. Make copies of trust documents 3. Visit county recorder's office 4. Stop all bank auto payments 5. Transfer savings to new account 6. Never sign anything again. Without reading twice then, underline dress no one knows yet. Keep it that way." She tore out the page and folded it twice, slid it into the back of her dresser drawer behind the mothballs and wedding photos. The betrayal had cut deep. But she wasn't broken. Not anymore. She was sharpening, and they wouldn't hear it coming. The first time she noticed her name was gone, it was on a group text. Or rather, it wasn't there. A flurry of messages buzzed on her phone, photos of balloons, paper plates, a backyard table full of cupcakes. Aunt Carol's birthday? The caption read. Evelyn scrawled up. No one had invited her. Not a word. She stared at the names listed in the chat. Megan, Darren, his parents, even Megan's college roommate. But not her. She set the phone down, screen still glowing. The room was quiet. The only sound was the slow tick of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator compressor. Her chair creaked as she stood. In the hallway, a photo frame caught her eye. It was new, Blackwood sleek, a college, photos from Megan's bridal shower. Evelyn recognized her daughter's smile, the champagne flutes, even the cookies she had baked, and dropped off. But she wasn't in any of the pictures. She hadn't been invited to the shower, either. They kept it small. Megan had texted after the fact. Mostly friends. She walked to the kitchen window, lifted the blind slightly. Outside, the mail carrier placed something into the box, gave a quick wave, then left. She waited a beat before opening the door. Inside the mailbox, flyers, coupons, and a postcard. She turned it over. It was from the elementary school. A notice about the upcoming Grandparents' Day. Evelyn blinked. She hadn't heard a word from Megan about it. Her grandson, Peter, was in 2nd grade. Last year, she had sat beside him in the school cafeteria, holding his hand while he ate pudding and told her a story about planets. He had made her a necklace from macaroni and glitter. Now nothing. She traced the edge of the postcard with her finger, then placed it quietly on the counter. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a different name lit up the screen. F. Peter. A message. Just one line.
F, are you okay, Grandma?
Her eyes blurred. She sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the table. It wasn't pity. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the relief of being seen. She typed back, "I'm okay, sweetheart. Thank you." Then she added, "Miss you." No reply came for several minutes. Then asked me to. Mom said not to text, but I wanted to. Evelyn held the phone close to her chest. The achy didn't go away. But it had a name now. It had love inside it. The next morning, her nameplate was gone. It had sat by the mailbox for 27 years. E. Harper, etched in brass. A bit worn but still proud. She had polished it every spring. But now, in its place, was a new one. Sinclair Davenport. She blinked. Davenport was Darren's last name. She hadn't realized Megan had changed her so quickly. Or that they'd claimed the front gate. Inside her chest, something shifted. Not sharp, just hollow. Later that week, she opened the kitchen drawer to find the family Christmas card. Unsigned. Usually, Megan mailed it herself, always with a scribbled notey, "Love you, Mom." This year, it arrived in a generic envelope, printed through a service. No handwriting, no warmth. The photo was lovely. Darren, Megan, Peter, posed by a fireplace, all dressed in matching green. No Evelyn. She flipped it over. Nothing. No space for her. No space for history. She tried to call. No answer. She left a message. Just checking in. Hope everything's okay. 3 days passed. Then her phone lit up with a notification. You've been removed from the group family chat events. Just like that. No explanation. No warning. She stared at the screen until it dimmed. Then she set the phone down and folded the laundry in silence. One sock at a time. One dish towel. The same motion she'd done since 1983. It was grief, but slower and quieter. That afternoon, she found Peter's old drawing still pinned on the fridge. Crayons crooked lines. The words, "My grandma is my hero." She hadn't seen him in over a month. She didn't want to overstep. Didn't want to start drama. But she missed him. So she bought a blank card, drew a smiley face inside, wrote, "You always make me proud." No reply, not that week, not the next. Until a voicemail from his school. "Hi, Miss Harper, this is Mrs. Langley, Peter's art teacher. We just wanted to let you know Peter made a painting today. It's a family tree project, and he put you right in the center. Said you taught him how to plant things and read big words. We thought you'd want to know." Evelyn pressed the phone to her ear, listened to it twice, then closed her eyes. They could erase her from invitations. But not from the roots. Not from the heart of the one who remembered. Would you stay silent if they tried to erase you? Or would you start carving your name back in? The smell of kettle corn and roasted pecans floated through the air. Evelyn stood near the foldable stage set up in Ash Creek's town square, clutching a paper program with both hands. Her name was listed forth on the list of legacy women of the community. She hadn't expected to speak. The mayor's assistant had called 3 days prior. "Just a few words, Mrs. Harper. Something about the early days of the library, if you're willing. Folks would love that." She had said yes. She'd even ironed her pale yellow blouse the night before, polished her shoes, and brought a photo of the original library ribbon cutting from 1982. Now she stood in the wings watching a local teacher finish her bit about a decades-old bake sale. Applause. Then her name. "Please welcome Evelyn Harper, retired school librarian and one of the hearts of this town." She walked slowly onto the platform. The mic was slightly too low. A volunteer adjusted it. The sun was bright but not hot, the kind of autumn day that made the sky look higher than usual. She took a breath. "I remember when the library first opened. We didn't have computers, just a card catalog and one fan in the corner that barely worked." Some chuckles. She smiled gently. "We used to clip articles out of the newspaper and paste them into binders by theme. Local weddings, school plays, even obituaries. I guess that was our search engine." More laughs, warmer. She went on. "There was a boy named Liam. Couldn't sit still in class to save his life. But every Wednesday after school, he'd come and read mysteries in the beanbag chair. I remember one day." A voice rang out from the side of the stage. Clear. Flat. "Okay, Evelyn. No need for a history lecture? Darren." He leaned against a support beam, arms folded, a smirk barely hidden behind sunglasses. Some people chuckled. Most didn't. Evelyn blinked. Her mouth was still open mid-sentence. She looked out at the crowd, rows of folding chairs, families eating funnel cake, children squirming on laps. A few people avoided her gaze. Megan, seated in the third row, looked down at her phone. She lowered the mic. She stepped back. The applause was polite, scattered. She smiled anyway, like she always did, then turned and walked off stage, heels clicking softly against the plywood floor. Behind the tent, she stood still for a long moment. The scent of cinnamon blew past her. A child screamed with laughter from the pumpkin ring toss. Her hands trembled slightly. She set the photo of the ribbon, cutting on a folding chair nearby. Darren's voice still echoed in her ears. Not angry, just dismissive, like she was a commercial break in someone else's story. She looked at the photo again. In it, she stood holding giant scissors, smiling wide, a younger Charles behind her, hand on her shoulder. She picked it up, dusted off the corner, and tucked it back into her purse. The envelope had no return address. Just her name written in careful cursive and a local postmark. It arrived 2 days after the fall festival, tucked between a grocery flyer and a water bill. Evelyn almost missed it. But something about the off-white paper and the tilt of her name made her pause. She opened it at the kitchen table, her usual spot, mug of lukewarm tea beside her. Inside, a single sheet, no signature, no date, just this thigh curse. "You deserved better up there, we saw it." Her hands didn't shake. Not this time. She read it again. Then again. It wasn't long. It wasn't poetic. But it reached something in her chest that had gone quiet. That line, "We saw it," carried more weight than 1,000 polite silences. Because someone had seen, not just the interruption, not just Darren's smirk or Megan's indifference, but the erasure. The way her presence was brushed aside like dust on a shelf. She looked out the window. Ash Creek looked the same as always. Maple trees lining the street, the breeze carrying leaves in slow spirals. But the world tilted just slightly, because she wasn't as invisible as they thought. She slid the letter back into the envelope and placed it inside the old recipe tin where she kept her keepsakes. First teeth, theater tickets, a napkin from Charles's retirement dinner. Then she stood, walked to the living room, pulled the photo from her purse, the one of her at the library opening, and pinned it to the corkboard above her desk. She hadn't meant to display it, but now it was a reminder of who she was, of what she'd built, of what others still remembered, even if they didn't clap. Outside, the wind picked up. She cracked the window and let it in. Tell me, if someone finally saw the dignity they tried to strip from you, would you stay quiet, or would you begin again? The filing cabinet hadn't been touched in years. Evelyn pulled open the bottom drawer with both hands, dust rising in a soft puff. The metal groaned like it resented the light. Inside, hanging folders sagged under decades of paper, tax records, warranty slips, yellowing bank statements. She hadn't planned to go through them tonight. But something inside her itched, a quiet urgency. She sat on the carpet, knees stiff, the drawer wide open in front of her. The autumn sun slanted through the blinds, striping the room with long bands of gold and shadow. She started at the back. A folder labeled Medical Charles. She flipped through hospital bills, hospice notes, his death certificate, creased from being handled too many times. Next, Utilities 2001-2011. Nothing useful. Then, Joint Accounts Harper? She paused. Pulled it out. Inside were statements from a credit union account she had almost forgotten. One Charles opened after retirement. They deposited a portion of his pension into it every month. It was supposed to be emergency money for home repairs, medical costs someday, Megan. She scanned the last statement dated 2021. Balance of 78.6. She frowned. There should have been more. Much more. She dug deeper, found a withdrawal form dated October 2022. Full balance removed. Signature Evelyn Harper. But it wasn't hers. It looked close. Too close. She leaned in, heart thudding, the scent of musty paper filling her nose. Whoever signed it had known her curves, her loops, but not her hesitation. Not the slight tremor she always had in her P. She set it aside. Another folder caught her eye. Mislabeled, mislegal. It bulged slightly. She opened it. Inside, an authorization to act as financial agent form. Darren's name. Megan scribbled initials in the corner. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered to herself, "They've been at this longer than I thought." She stood slowly, knees cracking, back tight. She almost closed the drawer, but something white and thick jammed in the side caught her attention. A heavy envelope. Handwritten, KEPCH 2003. Her breath caught. She slid it out carefully, opened it. Inside, a notarized deed. Black ink, crisp stamp still embossed. Parcel 84B, the land beneath Ash Creek United Church, owned by Evelyn Harper. Sole owner. Not transferred. Not leased beyond March 2025. She stared at the paper for a long time. Then, for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not bitter, not broken. Just awake. The clerk behind the counter wore a name tag that read, Teresa. She greeted Evelyn with the same small-town warmth she used for everyone. Polite, slightly rushed, but genuine. The county records office smelled faintly of toner and lemon cleaner. A ceiling fan spun slowly overhead. Evelyn slid the folded deed across the desk. "I'd like to verify this parcel is still listed under my name," she said. Teresa unfolded the document, adjusted her glasses, and nodded. "Sure thing. Just give me a moment." Clicking filled the silence. Teresa's nails tapped against the keyboard as the computer loaded an ancient interface. Evelyn watched the fan above. It creaked every third rotation. After a few minutes, Teresa looked up. "Yep, Parcel 84B. Still yours, Miss Harper. Clear title. No liens. Lease agreement on record. Expires March 25th, 2025. And Evelyn didn't smile. She just nodded. "Would you mind printing a certified copy?" "Of course." While the printer hummed, Evelyn ran her fingers along the edge of the counter, worn smooth from decades of hands just like hers, women paying taxes, filing marriages, closing chapters. Teresa handed over the paper. "Still warm. Anything else I can help you with today?" "No," Evelyn said, folding it carefully and placing it inside a folder lined with plastic. "You've helped enough." She walked back to her car slowly. The wind had picked up. Leaves skated across the sidewalk in little spirals. In the distance, the church steeple peeked above the trees. White, proud, quiet. They didn't know. Not Megan. Not Darren. Not the congregation who nodded politely at her once a year at Christmas service. No one knew the land under their precious church belonged to the woman they'd tried to erase. And she wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. She drove home without the radio on. No distractions. No noise. Back at the house, she placed the certified deed into a new manila envelope, sealed it, and wrote in neat capital letters, FTRST ILDAPL 2020 Then she opened her notebook, the same one where she had written her quiet plan. She flipped past grocery lists, past Peter's doodle of a spaceship, past the page that read, "Stop signing anything they hand me." She found a fresh page, wrote 2 words: Z leverage. Use it slow. She closed the notebook and tucked it beneath her mattress. The church would keep ringing its bells. For now. But the land beneath them belonged to her. And justice didn't need a microphone, just timing. The clock on her nightstand blinked 2:47. Evelyn lay on her side, eyes open, blanket bunched at her waist. The ceiling fan turned above her, slow and steady, slicing the silence into soft, mechanical intervals. She hadn't slept through a night in weeks. Her pillow smelled like lavender, but even that had stopped helping. The scent felt thin now, faded, like comfort gone stale. She turned to face the window. Moonlight spilled through the blinds, striping the carpet in quiet silver. Outside, the street was still. A distant dog barked once, then nothing. In the silence, she heard him. Not his voice exactly, more like the shape of it. The way Charles used to speak when the world got too loud, steady, low. Certain. "Power isn't loud," he once told her, after Megan got suspended in 10th grade for talking back to a teacher. "It's not fists or shouting, it's knowing and waiting." Back then, she didn't understand. Now she did. The betrayal wasn't loud either. It came through forms, signatures, slow silences. Being left off a list. Being thanked, then forgotten. She sat up. The bedsheet clung to her calves. She pushed it off, reached for her robe, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The floor was cold. She poured a glass of water, sat at the table, no lights on, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock. She opened her notebook, the one with her quiet plan. She turned to a blank page and wrote, "Guess new account, credit union only, remove Darren's access, call Ellen, update POA, no joint statements, freeze auto drafts, secure original sir." Each line steadied her. At 40:12, she pulled her file box onto the table, sifted through insurance papers, trust documents, birth certificates. She found the power of attorney form from 20 Lendine. Darren listed as primary. She flipped the page. Charles's handwriting in the margins. "This is temporary. Revisit in 5 years. See," she let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. "Good man," she whispered. She folded the form, placed it in a labeled envelope, says, "To revoke priority." Then she opened her laptop, logged into her bank, started the process of opening a new savings account. Her fingers didn't tremble. Not this time. By sunrise, the sky was the color of ash, blue creeping at the edges, birds beginning to stir. She stood at the back door, sipping the last of her water, watching the light return. Sleep hadn't come, but resolve had, and that was enough for now. Ellen hadn't changed much. Same tight bun, same navy skirt suit, same office tucked behind the florist shop on Oak Street, where the smell of roses sometimes crept under the door mid-sentence. She greeted Evelyn with a hug, brief, but real. "It's been too long," Ellen said, motioning her to the chair. "What brings you in today?" Evelyn placed a folder on the desk, crisp, labeled, "I need to update everything," and Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" Evelyn nodded. "New power of attorney, new will, new trust directives, remove Darren from any access, Megan too." Ellen didn't blink. She opened the folder and began reviewing. "No medical directives to update." "I've already signed new ones," Evelyn said. "Cuppies are with my doctor and at home." Ellen paused, looked up. "Do you want to talk about what changed?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, I just want to protect what's mine." They worked for nearly an hour. Ellen dictated revisions. Evelyn initialed lines. Pages shuffled, pen scratched. When they reached the section on real property, Ellen leaned forward. "You want to leave the church land to Peter?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but not until he turns 25. And I want it held in a trust until then. No early access, no loopholes, any contingencies. If Darren or Megan contest it, they're disqualified from everything else." Ellen looked impressed. "Poison pill clause, ruthless?" "No," Evelyn said softly. "Just overdue." Ellen slid the final draft across the desk. "Review this at home. We'll notarize on Monday." Evelyn placed the stack in her bag. As she stood, Ellen asked gently, "Do you want them to know now?" Evelyn buttoned her coat slowly. No, her voice was calm, even. "Let them feel safe a little longer." She walked to the door, paused as a gust of wind sent rose petals tumbling past the window. They should enjoy the silence. Then she left. And for the first time in months, she didn't look back. The teller smiled politely as Evelyn slid her ID across the counter. It was her 3rd visit in 2 weeks, but always at different branches, different tellers, always early, before the crowds, before questions. "I'd like to close this account," she said calmly. The young man nodded, typing quickly.
You sure, ma'am? It's been open a long time.
"Yes, I'm sure." He handed her a form. She signed without hesitation. Behind her, sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows, casting soft rectangles onto the floor. The bank smelled faintly of copier ink and stale mints. 10 minutes later, she walked out with a cashier's check in her purse and a quiet heartbeat. Not racing, just steady. That afternoon, she visited the credit union across town, opened 2 new accounts under her maiden name, listed Peter as sole beneficiary, effective upon her passing, with conditions already filed. She declined the debit card. No electronic trail. No noise at home. She sat at the kitchen table and reviewed her utilities. She switched each one, electric, water, even the trash collection, off auto pay. Then she logged in and updated mailing addresses. All statements now sent to the P.O. box. No more paper trail at the house. Next, the insurance company. A short, scripted phone call. "I'd like to remove a secondary contact from my file." "Yes, Darren Sinclair? No replacement." She smiled as she hung up. It was like undoing knots. One careful pull at a time, she gathered her documents, slipped them into labeled folders. Father's new will, active trust, updated PUA bank statements, closed church deeds, certified. Each one felt like a brick laid beneath her. A foundation. That Saturday, she baked an apple pie, golden crust, cinnamon-laced. A little cracked on one side, but still warm. When she arrived at Megan's door, Peter opened it. His face lit up. "Grandma." She smiled, crouched slightly to kiss his forehead. "Hi, love. I brought something sweet." Darren appeared behind him, arms crossed. Megan followed, apron dusted with flour. Evelyn handed over the pie with both hands. "No reason. Just thought of you." Darren took it, smirked faintly. "Well, aren't you full of surprises lately?" She met his gaze, level and quiet. "Sometimes," she said. "It's better that way." She didn't stay long. Just enough to be polite, to watch Peter's eyes, to note how Megan smiled more for show now, to see the weight of assumed control still resting comfortably on their shoulders. Let them. For now. She returned home just before sunset, removed her shoes by the door, and sat at the table with a cup of chamomile. Then she opened her notebook, crossed off 3 more lines. She smiled.
Not wide.
Just enough. The light in her study was soft, just a small lamp in the corner casting golden circles onto the desk. Evelyn sat with a scanner humming beside her, feeding in one document at a time. First the old power of attorney with Darren's name, then the withdrawal form with the forged signature, followed by the 2022 account statement showing the full balance gone, and finally the authorization Megan had once called just standard banking stuff. Each scan clicked into her encrypted drive, labeled backed up. She emailed them to Ellen. Subject line: Hunter's documentation, quiet filey, no message, no explanation, just the truth digitized. She sipped cold tea, rereading the labels, double-checking folders. Then she turned to her phone and scrolled through old texts, ones where Megan had asked her to just sign this or swing by the bank. She took screenshots, saved them in a folder called Subtle Pressure. Then she opened the Family Chat Events thread, the one she'd been removed from. She had a saved archive. Megan didn't know that. She scrolled back to last summer, photos of a beach trip Evelyn hadn't been invited to, yet her houseplants had been left with a neighbor, just in case. She took one last screenshot. That went in the folder too. The evidence wasn't loud, but it was clear. She closed the drive and ejected the USB, placing it in the hollow base of an old sewing kit she kept in her closet. It clicked shut. Safe. Her phone buzzed. A message from Megan. "Hey, haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" Evelyn stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed of "Things are quiet, just as they should be, Dins, no more, no less." She powered off the phone and set it face down. Then she reached for the small black notebook that had followed her for months. She flipped past lists, crossed out tasks, and fragments of Charles's voice in her memory. At the last page, she picked up her pen, wrote 3 words. Just one day. Just one. She underlined it once, then closed the book with both hands. The night was still, but she wasn't not anymore. The morning began like any other. Evelyn rose at 6, made her bed, and brewed a single cup of coffee. Dark, no sugar. The air was crisp. A light fog hovered just beyond the window, softening the outline of the elm trees. She sat at the kitchen table, opened her notebook, and looked at the circled date. Today. No more drafts, no more almost. Today was execution. At 60:45, she picked up the phone and dialed Ellen's private line. "Ready?" she said simply when the call connected. No more explanations needed. By 800, Evelyn had signed 3 notarized documents and dropped them at the courier office. 1. Termination of power of attorney Darren Sinclair. 2. Formal notice of trust transfer. 3. Ownership verification for Parcel 84B, each form sealed, stamped, and labeled for overnight delivery to the regional bank and county recorder. She paused before handing over the last envelope. Ran her fingers over the flap, then let it go. Back home, she logged into her account, her new one. Balance is stable, no shared access, no auto payments to Darren's utilities, no co-signatures from Megan. She smiled, quiet. Controlled. The old accounts were closed, frozen, archived. Any attempt to access them would now require her written reauthorization, and that would never come. At 19:30, she visited the florist on Oak Street and picked up a small bouquet, orange mums and soft white daisies. Not for anyone else, just for her dining table. A quiet reward. By noon, it was done. No fireworks. Just precision. She set the vase down on the table, sat with her coffee, and looked outside. Across town, in a 2-story house with Fox shutters and leased furniture, Darren clicked through his banking app. Then again, error message. Access denied. He tried the backup login. Same result. He frowned, stood, walked to the kitchen, phone still in hand. "Megan," he called, voice sharper than usual. She glanced up from her laptop. "I can't see the joint account. Did you change something?" She shook her head. "No. Try the last 4 again." He did, still locked out. He tossed the phone on the counter. "This makes no sense." Then he froze, because in the corner of the screen, an alert flashed. "Live account access revoked, Evelyn Harper." Megan's face paled. In the silence, something slipped from her hand. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the kitchen, and 2 rooms away, Peter looked up from his book, startled. Outside their house, everything seemed quiet. But the ground had already shifted. The phone rang at 17:17 p.m. Evelyn let it buzz 4 times before answering.
Hi, Darren,
she said, voice level, almost warm. "What's going on?" His tone wasn't angry yet, just tight, confused. "I can't access the joint account. Or the trust. Or, what did you do?" Evelyn stirred her tea gently, the spoon tapping porcelain. "I followed the paperwork," she replied. "What paperwork?" "The ones you had me sign years ago. I kept copies." There was a pause. He tried again. "Why now? Why suddenly?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to the window. Outside, a delivery van backed out of a neighbor's driveway. A squirrel darted across the lawn, startled by nothing. "You remember that day?" she said softly. "At the town festival, when I was speaking?" More silence. "You interrupted me. Told me to stop lecturing. That's not— Look, I didn't mean." She cut in calm. "You taught me something that day." He scoffed. "Oh yeah? What's that?" "That silence," she said, "means consent." His breath hitched. She could hear it. "I've been quiet a long time," she added. "Grandma?" Megan's voice suddenly appeared in the background, tight with panic. "We didn't mean for things to go this far. We thought it would be easier if you let us handle things." "I know," Evelyn said. Another pause. "But you didn't handle them. You drained them." Megan's voice rose. "That's not fair." "No," Evelyn said gently. "That's legal." Neither of them spoke. She let the silence stretch. "I'm not asking for anything," she said finally. "Not permission. Not forgiveness." Darren tried one last time. "Can we talk? In person? Maybe fix this?" "I think," she said, "you've fixed quite enough." Then she ended the call. No slam, no shout, just the soft tap of the phone returning to its cradle. She stood there for a moment, breathing steady, then returned to her tea. In a house that was still hers, in a life that was finally quiet and fully her own. At 4:08 p.m., the email came through. Subject's confirmation of trust update. Evelyn clicked it open. Ellen's tone was brisk, professional, as always. "Dear Evelyn, all requested changes have been completed. The amended trust POA revocation and updated will are now active. Originals are filed. You retain sole authority over all assets. Best, Ellen." I'd Evelyn read it twice. Then once more, slower. Each word felt like breath returning to lungs that hadn't drawn fully in years. She printed the email. The paper was still warm when she clipped it to a folder labeled AF confirmed 2025 Olive. Her tea had gone cold again. But she didn't mind. She stood, opened the kitchen window a crack, and let in the late afternoon air. It smelled of cut grass and distant chimney smoke. A peaceful kind of end. The doorbell didn't ring. The phone didn't buzz. Only the ping of one final message. An email from Darren, subjects, "Why are you doing this?" And no greeting, no punctuation, no apology, just 7 words stretched thin by panic. Evelyn didn't reply. She didn't need to. Instead, she hit print, then took the sheet, placed it on the desk, and reached for a pen. Her handwriting was small, deliberate. She wrote beneath his question us because I remember everything's there. She capped the pen, folded the paper once, and slid it into the back of her notebook, the one where she had once written "use it slow." Outside, the wind picked up again. But inside, Evelyn Harper felt still, unmoved, unshaken, unapologetic. The silence didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like fog through the corners of the house. No follow-up calls, no visits, no angry emails from Darren, not even Megan's usual passive-aggressive, just checking in texts. Just nothing. Evelyn moved through the quiet like someone walking through freshly fallen snow. Careful, thoughtful, undisturbed, she began packing 3 days after the email from Ellen. Not in a rush, not out of spite, just ready. The house had felt less like hers for years. Now it was just a shell, echoing with memories that no longer held weight. She started in the study. Books first, not all of them, just the ones that mattered. Her worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, Charles's gardening guides, Peter's favorite picture books from when he was 5. She wrapped each in old newspaper. The scent of ink and dust rose around her as she worked. Then came the photos. One by one, she removed them from the walls and shelves. Charles at the lake, Peter on a tricycle, her holding a certificate from the school district in 1993. She didn't cry. She just wrapped them gently and placed them in a box marked key. In the bedroom, she found a scarf Megan had given her 10 Mother's Days ago. Pale blue, still smelling faintly of perfume. She folded it, packed it, not out of sentiment, but because even the cruelest endings don't erase everything. By the 4th day, most of the living room sat in labeled boxes. Bus, church files, kitchen donate, photos, private, letters, read later. She had rented a small moving van. Booked a short-term cottage rental 2 towns over. Enough space for a garden, a view of the river. No one knew where she was going, no farewell dinner, no posted note. Just a shift, like a bird leaving before the frost. She stood in the kitchen that final morning, a single mug of coffee warming her palms, and looked around the empty walls. No regret, just release. The home had served its purpose. And now, so had she. Peter showed up just before sunset. Evelyn had already loaded the last of the boxes into the van. The sky behind her was lavender and gold, the kind of light that made things look softer than they were. She didn't expect the knock. When she opened the door, there he was, backpack slung over one shoulder, hair tousled, cheeks flushed from biking fast. "I saw the truck," he said. "Are you really leaving?" She nodded. "I am." He looked down at his shoes, then up again. "Can I come?" Her breath caught. She opened the screen door, stepped aside. Peter walked in without waiting for an answer. He scanned the room, empty shelves, bare walls. His eyes landed on the spot where her photo collage used to hang. "They didn't tell me anything," he said quietly. "They just acted like you stopped existing." Evelyn sat down on the arm of the sofa, hands folded in her lap. "I didn't stop. I just stepped away." Peter looked at her, something fragile in his gaze. "I don't want to stay here anymore." She studied him. He was 12, but older somehow. His voice had weight. His backpack looked too small for the choice he'd just made. "Your parents?" she began. "They don't talk to me much anymore either," he said. "They're always whispering, and the house feels weird. Like angry all the time?" She nodded slowly. He sat beside her. For a long moment, they didn't speak. Then Evelyn reached into her purse, pulled out a folded piece of paper. "A lease agreement, the cottage by the river, 2 bedrooms, a little garden. I have space," she said. Peter looked at her, not as a child looking at an adult, but as someone choosing to believe in kindness again. She reached for his hand, held it, didn't let go. When they left, no one came out to stop them. No one stood at the driveway, no questions, just 2 figures, one old, one young, closing a door that no longer felt like home and walking into the quiet. Together, the cottage sat at the bend of the river, where the water slowed and the willow trees dipped low enough to kiss the surface. Evelyn kept the windows open most mornings. The breeze carried the scent of wet stone and wild mint. On quiet days, you could hear the fish jump. The old sunroom had become the library, not big. Just 2 shelves along the wall, a reading table in the middle, and a basket of children's books by the window. Every book had been hand-cleaned, sorted by theme, and labeled in her soft handwriting. She called it the reading room. But locals simply said, Evelyn's place by the river. Some brought her jam, some dropped off paperbacks. No one asked what brought her to town. And she didn't offer. Peter went to school down the road. He rode his bike in the morning, left his helmet on the hook by the door, and returned each afternoon to help shelve returned books. They had a rhythm now. Breakfast at 7, tea at 3, dinner just before dusk. Some evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the water. One Tuesday, as the sun dipped low and the porch creaked beneath their chairs, Peter asked, "Do you ever miss them?" She didn't answer right away. The question wasn't angry, just searching. The breeze moved through the trees. A frog chirped near the bank. Her tea had gone cool in her hands. "I miss who they were," she said finally. "Not who they became?" Peter nodded slowly. He didn't press. They sat in silence after that. Not the kind that hurts, the kind that heals. The bell above the door chimed softly. It was nearly closing time, and the late sun stretched long shadows across the reading room floor. Peter looked up from the return cart as a little girl stepped in. No older than 8, her braids tied with blue ribbon. A worn copy of Charlotte's Web in her hands. She walked carefully, as if the books might shatter if she moved too fast. Peter smiled. Looking for anything special? She glanced around, then pointed to Evelyn, who was shelving a large print novel near the window. "I see your grandma?" Peter hesitated, then said, "She's the reason I still believe in people." The girl blinked, like she didn't fully understand. But Evelyn, standing just a few feet away, heard every word. She didn't turn, didn't speak. She simply slid the book onto the shelf and smiled, not for anyone else to see, just for herself. Later that evening, after the lights were off and the books were straightened, Evelyn sat at her desk with a blank notacard. She pulled out her favorite pen, the one Charles gave her on their 25th anniversary, and wrote 5 words in slow, steady strokes. "Let the world forget, but never forget yourself." As she tucked the card into the drawer beside her teacup. Outside, the river moved steady as always, and inside, so did she.